All right, Bruchim Aboim, welcome everyone. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about Thanksgiving as a holiday. It's been claimed by many rabbis that it's prohibited for Jews to celebrate Thanksgiving because it's a Christian holiday. This includes rabbis who I highly revere, such as Rabbi Victor Miller. Other rabbis had different views about it. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein had several different responses about Thanksgiving, and he had pretty much a wide variety of responses to various questions that were posed about it. Some were in favor of celebrating it, admiring the holidays, the day of Thanksgiving. Others, it was a question whether it was a problem to set aside a time, and even whether it was a violation of Chukas Hagoy, of it says in the Bible that you're not allowed to follow the statutes of the nation where you are, and if that was a violation, and so therefore the question was, if one likes to eat turkey, may he eat turkey on this day? If it's not to celebrate the holiday, which would seem to indicate that it's prohibited if it is to celebrate the holiday. It's known that Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik from Yeshiva University would have his Talmud lecture, his shiur, early on Thanksgiving. He would not forego it, but he would start it earlier and end it earlier so he could go home to Boston to have a Thanksgiving dinner with his family. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe also spoke admirably about Thanksgiving. Badl Chaim Tovim, a friend of mine sent me a video from, I believe, the current or the previous chief rabbi from the Sephardic chief rabbis of Israel. I believe it was Rabbi David Yosef, one of Rav Ovadia Yosef's sons, who was saying along the line of what Rav Moshe says, that it was a day that was set aside to celebrate because the people had nothing to eat and they found a turkey, and so they decided to make a holiday to thank God for finding the turkey. And that this was essentially a Christian holiday, and so therefore it would be prohibited for Jews to celebrate Thanksgiving because it's a Christian holiday. Now, many people make mistakes when it comes to the concept of Das Torah. They think it's some kind of a magic thing that if a certain rabbi with a big name, even who is a big rabbi and a great leader, says something, that is the same as prophecy. Now, on one hand, we do say Chacham Adif Minavi, that a sage is stronger than a prophet, and that logic is therefore stronger than revealed religion, and logical arguments within religious texts have weight. But that only works if the information is given over properly. If someone has wrong information, if a gadol has wrong historical or scientific information or other information, isn't given the whole story in a civil case that's dealing with, two litigants, or he only hears one side of the case and so forth, just because he renders a psak doesn't mean that it's actually so. It was a din Torah about the Yerusha of a certain Hasidic Rebbe that was decided as far as which of the four brothers should become the Rebbe, and then that same Bezdin later reviewed it, maybe 20 or 30 years later. All of those Rebbes are gone now, but then their children are now Rebbes, and the one who claimed to be the only one, he picked only one of his sons to be the Rebbe. So the same Gadol, the same Dayan, the Litvish Dayan, who looked at this, he looked over and he said, wait a second, this is Zitkain Din Torah, and this hasn't been educated properly. and so it was assumed that, oh, we already have a psak from a Beis Din, was not actually so. When it comes to the celebration of Thanksgiving, we have to understand, first of all, the nature of the United States of America. Because Thanksgiving Day, when we speak of the first Thanksgiving, that is not when Thanksgiving was established. Thanksgiving was established, even though there were several times that were celebrated by various settlers in North America as a day of Thanksgiving. Some which predated the Puritans, and it took place in various places, Texas and Florida and in Virginia, as well as the one in Massachusetts. That's the most famous one. But that is not what established it as an annual event. When the United States became a country under the Constitution, with the Constitution that we have now, George Washington one time declared a day of Thanksgiving. Now, understanding that the United States has in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution, the Establishment Clause, when he declared a day of Thanksgiving, it was a day for all religions to go to their own house of worship, no matter what religion it was, and to have their own service of Thanksgiving. And the Jews in New York, which was the capital, New York City, at the time, in the Shearith Israel congregation, it's known as the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, they had a service there in the synagogue, just like Lahavdil, the Christian churches, had as well. And that is really the root of Thanksgiving. And so we see there's a precedent that the Jews of that time, Orthodox Jews of that time, even if maybe they were not led by the greatest Gedolim, but they had Talmidei Chachomim, including the Reverend Gershom Sheshis, who went along with this idea that we're going to have a day of Thanksgiving. And to celebrate it as in a religious way that would be in a non-denominational manner, that anyone of any religion could mark this day of Thanksgiving in a religious way that was not bound to any one religion. And so the theories that a lot of the Gedolim had, that this was somehow maybe a missionary effort to try to trick Jews into becoming Christians, or other imaginations that they had, were just not historically true. It was recognized that this was, whatever religion you belong to, the day we were going to be thankful to God for America. And it really was not connected to the Thanksgiving that took place in Massachusetts, in the Plymouth colony. It was only later that that was invoked as an archetype of this holiday. And as we said, it was not initially dedicated as an annual holiday. It was every now and then, every few years, the president would decide to declare a day of Thanksgiving, and the governor of different states would decide. And so in an interesting manner, Jefferson, for example, as the governor of Virginia, would declare days of Thanksgiving, but not as president. And some posit it was because he understood that even though Pennsylvania had the Statute of Religious Freedom that Jefferson helped to author. Nonetheless, as he understood that these types of things were allowed on the state level, but he felt that perhaps on the federal level it could be a violation of the Establishment Clause, even in a non-denominational manner. And this was, a point of contention between the various founders and framers as to how exactly we understand this this idea of the Establishment Clause. It was generally understood that the Establishment Clause meant that there would be no one state church, the same way like there's a Church of England, or in other countries have official churches, and in America there would be no official church, but on the federal level. But on the state level, even Jefferson, it seemed, would admit that it would be permissible on the state and local level to have a state church, as was practiced, that there were established state churches for a number of decades. I think some remained established even into maybe the 1890s or so. And it was only later that the Supreme Court, I believe erroneously, reinterpreted the Establishment Clause. It was, I believe, 1947, that they established their opinion that the Establishment Clause does apply to state and local governments, but also stated that equal allocation between various religious groups in a non-discriminatory way was nonetheless permissible, both on the state and local and federal level, which is, it's true, but nonetheless, to extend the Establishment Clause into the states and local laws, some take it as an interpretation of the 14th Amendment. There's other interpretations of this, but nonetheless, that's beside the point. So further along, as far as what we're discussing with this question, later on it was President Lincoln who began to make it an annual day of Thanksgiving as a means of trying to bring the country back together during the Civil War. And as a sign of unity and patriotism that we mark a day of thanksgiving and praise to God. But he never, now there are those who will say, well, if a Christian is saying this, so then he's talking about the Trinity. First of all, there's no evidence that Lincoln was a Trinitarian Christian. There's no record of him ever being baptized as a Christian. And his religious allegiance remains murky. He certainly was someone who believed in God and who read the Bible. But he was not religious in the sense of what was considered religious at that time. He perhaps similar to Jefferson could be identified as a person who was maybe spiritual but not religious, along the lines of Jefferson and Franklin in that tradition, to the point where Jefferson often was considered not to be a Christian, but some sort of a deist, and some Muslims would consider him to be an honorary Muslim. That's what I often would hear in Virginia, the amount of respect that they had for Jefferson in the American Muslim community. So the way I understand it, though, is that since even if they were not the most pious Orthodox, but the Orthodox Jewish community in America at the time of George Washington did mark Thanksgiving in a religious way, And I believe that as patriotic Americans, it is proper to do so, and also, or at least permitted to do so. And if one wants to have a Sudas Haidor, to be thankful to God for this great country, America, a feast of Thanksgiving, I believe it is proper to do so. And I believe that those and since those who say that it's not proper to do so give their reasoning, and their reasoning is wrong, meaning they believe that it was set and established in the 1620s because they discovered a turkey, and it was some miracle that they discovered the turkey, and for that reason they have this holiday, whereas the actual history was that the various presidents would have an executive order occasionally, but traditionally at that time, the last Thursday in November, as or the fourth Thursday in November, different opinions depending on how it worked, as a day of Thanksgiving. And it became an annual tradition in the time of Lincoln. FDR, he tried to make it a week earlier, and there was a whole controversy about that. And I believe it was in the time of Truman or Eisenhower that it was actually maybe earlier, maybe it was FDR, I'm not sure. It was actually signed into law with congressional approval to be an actual national holiday. Again, I would say there's no obligation to do this, but to have Hakaras Hatov for America, and to express that with some spiritual, religious fervor in our own tradition, meaning to have, something in shul for that, and to also have something, to have a Suda, even though I was always taught that that's not the way it should be approached. But humbly, I posit, based on the historical facts of the matter, that it is indeed the proper way to approach Thanksgiving, and that those who oppose it, they do so out of ignorance, and with all due respect. I don't expect rabbis to be historians, although Rabbi Victor Miller was a historian, and I'm a little bit surprised by his most strict opinion on the matter, that he holds that it's Yarag Val Yavor. But it's somewhat consistent with his more zealous Kanoish approach to most things. But I think Rabbi Miller, Zechus Yigumleinu, would agree that it is proper to put out the American flag on Thanksgiving, which is actually, flag etiquette is that one is supposed to display the American flag on all national holidays, and that would also include Christmas and New Year's, even though those are Christian holidays. And I will go further also to point out that New Year's Day is a Christian holiday, and is actually prohibited for Jews to celebrate. And that it's New Year's Day is in the Catholic Church, it is a holy day of obligation. Originally, if you do the math, if Oso Aish was born on the 25th, then his bris would be January 1st. And so that was the reason for the holiday. The Catholics turned it to a day to honor Mary, but the Orthodox Christians still hold it as the feast of the circumcision. And since that is linked to what would be considered for Jews to be avodah zarah, for Gentiles it would probably be under shituf, that would be mutter for them, that would be permitted for them. But for Jews, that is connected to avodah zarah, even though it's generally not celebrated by most Americans as a religious holiday. But nonetheless, New Year's Day is a Christian holiday, and it is prohibited for Jews to celebrate New Year's Day. But Thanksgiving is not a Christian holiday. Thanksgiving is an American holiday that is celebrated by Christians and Jews and other people of faith and people of no faith at all. What I would say, it should be looked at as a Yom Iyun in the Inyan of Hakaras Hatov. Even though we say Modim Anachnu Lach 3 times a day, I don't see any problem with singing Zmiris by the Thanksgiving Suda. Oida Lekel, and Yod Lashem Chasnoi, and Mizmor Lasoda, and Hod Lashem Kitov, Mizmorei Tehillim, that are the Inyanim of Haidoah, I believe is the way that one should mark Thanksgiving. And one of my Rebbeim, who I'm not going to mention because he might get harassed by this, agrees, and this is actually, I learned it from him, and most of my other Rebbeim disagree. But again, I believe that a lot of that also has to do with a certain amount of misunderstanding and other things, and I think so. That is the way I approach it. I certainly think, me as an American, for me to celebrate the 4th of July or Thanksgiving is more important than any Jew who celebrates the Israeli holidays like Yom Ha'atzmaut or whatever that really have nothing to do with us. We're American Jews, we're not Israelis. If an Israeli wants to have a Sudas Haidah, again, and I remember Rabbi Leff, Zol Gesund sein, he had that we should have a Sudas Haidah on Heir. And he said it's not a Sudas Mitzvah, it's a Sudas Haidah. And if you want to make a siyum or something, to make it a Sudas Mitzvah. Now, to me, I don't see what is to celebrate Heir, because it's the day when 1% of the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael got killed in the war. We don't celebrate when wars start, we celebrate when wars finish. And the war really hasn't finished. We've been pretty much, in Eretz Yisrael, there's been I don't want to say we, but they have been in a constant state of war since that began. Since the Medina began. And it's only brought tzoros to the Klal Yisrael. So, it's not what we make a Yom Tov about. Hanukkah is when the war ended. Purim is when the war ended. So, and Yom Ha'atzmaut is the day when the war began. I could understand a little bit better Yom Yerushalayim because it's the day the war ended, but still there are other issues with Yom Yerushalayim. So in any event, but I see it as a kal v'chomer that Thanksgiving and the 4th of July, to me as an American Jew, are days when I'm thankful to the Rebbeinu Shalom for this great country, which I believe these United States are more of a rachis tzmichas gulasenu than the Medina that happens to be occupying Eretz Yisrael at this time, and is really preventing Mashiach from coming, as opposed to this country that's built on in God we trust, and that we've been endowed with by our Creator, and that it's a hisgalus in many ways of connections to that we're throwing off the tyranny of kings and accepting that we only have one king, that's the Rebbeinu Shalom, which Israel is not built on that, Medinat Yisrael is not built on that, but America is built on that in a way no other country in the world ever was before and really ever is now, even afterwards. And so for this, I believe it's appropriate to constantly be giving thanks. And if, as patriotic Americans, our president calls upon us to have a day of thanksgiving and praise,